Hey everyone, sorry we are late. I was having issues with my Mexican internet down here where I am, so I do apologize. My name is Diego. I am with the support team at Designlab, and leading our awesome design school workshop today is our awesome mentor, Kieran. Basically what's gonna happen is we're gonna let Kieran share his magic with us. He'll do all of the talking, and then we'll get to all of your questions at the end. And we actually do get to everyone's questions at the end. So we promise that we will. And thank you again for joining us. Happy Thursday or Friday, depending on where you are. I'll let Kieran take it away.
Awesome. Hey everyone, it's been a while, so thanks for coming round. And yeah, let's talk about Figma Variants and what they kind of mean for our designs and potentially our design systems if you're using those in the future. As Diego said, put your questions into the questions tab in the chat there, and we'll do our best to get to all of them towards the end. The first part of this is going to be largely, let me share my screen. So share screen and share entire. Yep, there, let's do that. Share the entire thing. And let's go over to Figma. So there we go. And shift to, there we are. So today's topic is what's new in Figma Variants. And what we're going to go through today is a talk for about 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to go into a Q&A for about 40 minutes. The reason why it's going to be a little bit shorter on the 20-minute side is because it is quite easy to see what it is. But I think there's going to be a lot more questions about, like, how do we do this? How do we do that? How does this fit into my current workflow and so on? So start thinking about questions now if you haven't already, and we'll get into it. All right. So the very first thing is, what are variants? Well, the easy question here is, the easy answer I should say here is that when you have a lot of different components, you eventually start to have components that start to look the same, but they're just slightly different. So this could be in the form of, let me zoom in on this one here. This can be in the form of something like this, where we are creating a desktop, tablet, and mobile version of something, right? It could be in the in the way of doing states for a particular design or a particular component. So things like a text field that then has a default state, a success state, and an error state, right? It could also be something even more than that, where we are doing like a very similar kind of component, but there might be variations beyond just the basic thing. So something like a primary button, a secondary button, and a tertiary button. We have those three variations there, but then we also have without an icon, with an icon before, with an icon after, and then with an icon only. So we then have all of those. So we then have 4, 4, 4. So that gives us 12 variations of the same component. And then we have all the states for that. So as you can sort of see, this adds up really quickly. And if you have a look at my components panel in my assets, in my assets panel, you can see how much this takes up all of my assets panel. There's a lot going on here, right? Even if we were to just do it as a list view, there's still so much going on here that we need to make sure that we're taking control over, right? So there's so many like variants of this. It'd be so much easier if this was all handled in a much better way. And this is where variance comes in. So as I mentioned, there's a few different ways to think about what variance can do. It's not just like, oh, there's a state change. Okay, therefore, let's create a variant. There's all different ways. So let's create a variant based on something that is already existing. So in this case, we have our search desktop and our search mobile. What you might be used to is doing the slashes at the end, differentiating your variants already, because you might be doing this in terms of creating similar things, but you want to have them grouped together in your assets panel. And that slashes really helps with that because it creates little folders for you to use. But it can get really difficult really quickly. As you can sort of see here, I've got quite a few going on. What we will want to then do is select both of these. We can sort of see that they are both components, search desktop, search mobile. If we combine these as variants over in the right-hand side, so this is a new part of the properties panel, which is variants. If you combine these as a variant, what happens there is we create a variant set, right? So what this allows us to do is we can see that we have our component, and then we have a whole bunch of different variants in it. So what we then have in our variant set is we have our properties and our values inside of this. So when we did that slash, what that denoted to Figma is that, hey, this is a property of the search component. So what you'll notice is that because I had search slash, it took that first part before the slash and said, oh, this is the main name for the component. So let's use that. Then anything after the slash will be used as a property value, right? So what we have here is it doesn't know what the property value is called. So it just gives it a generic name like property one, but it does give us that desktop and mobile like we asked for. So if we double click in, if we have the component set selected, we can actually click into this and then say device, for example. What it allows us to do is name, if we have more slashes, as you can sort of see, we'll get to that in just a second, button slash primary slash icon after. If we have more slashes, it can get confusing really quick as to what values belong to what properties and so on and so forth. So we need to name them appropriately. So just doing that, what we're able to do now is we can see that it's now just become one single component rather than a search slash mobile and search slash desktop for that, and creating a folder that then has these two components inside of it. Now it's just one single component, and it gives what it bases the preview on is actually the top leftmost component, right? So that's why you can sort of see that the desktop version is showing in the asset preview there. So let's drag this in and see what's changed since last time. So if we look at this, we can see that now over on the right-hand side, instead of just having the ability to swap an instance with another instance of another component, what it allows us to do is it actually gives us the ability to change this variant to something else. What you'll also see is nothing has actually changed. If I click into it here, nothing has changed in terms of the layers, right? All that's changed is that this is an instance of that, plain and simple as before. But what it does give you access to is the ability to change this. All the overrides are all the same, but the variant can be changed. So I can change it from desktop to mobile and then back to desktop again. So why is this helpful? Well, the main reason is because let's say that you have a whole bunch of designs and we've created like a desktop version, a tablet version, and then a mobile version, right? So obviously these aren't the right sizes, so don't pay attention to those, but I'm just trying to do this quickly. So let's say that I have these three versions. What I can then do is I can duplicate this and put this inside of there, and then also do the same thing again over here and say that this is my tablet version, which I haven't created. But I could create my mobile version over here and put it inside of there, and then say that this is my mobile version and move it inside of there, right? And by doing that, it makes going from responsive super, super quick, super, super easy. And you can imagine if you had this inside of auto layout and all that kind of stuff, all your designs around it would also change based on if there was a height change or a width change or whatever else. So let's try something a little bit harder where we have a little bit more changes. So based on a state change. So if we grab our components, so we can do the same sort of thing here. We can actually say combine as variants, And then again, we have the default success and error. And because we did that there, it actually has that ready to go. But what we can sort of see here is that we need to change this to our state. Then we can also see that we have the default error and success, but we may want to change the error and success around. So we might want to have success first because we want to show that off more often. So in the case of that, what actually happens is if we don't do that, if we bring in the text field from the assets panel, just like we did before, and we type something in, let's say that we go to default error and success, you can see that the drop down here is reflective of the order that is in the variance set here. So if we click on this, you can see default error success. So to change that, all we have to do is simply drag and drop that over. And then when we go to change it in here, it also changes in there, which is nice. So obviously for a drop down of 3, it's not that big of a deal. But when you have like 7, so something like this, or 6 or 7 like this, so default hover, focus, active, loading, and disabled, you'll want to make sure that that is in a semi-ordered fashion, right? All right, so the other thing here is about overrides. So overrides are a bit tricky because what needs to happen is that the structure of your component needs to be the same across all the different things. So what I've done here is I've actually made sure that the structure is the same across all of them. So if we like click into the toggle down the variance there, what we can sort of see is that there is an input auto layout, then we have a container, then we have content, then we have input, right? And that's the same for every one of these. If there is an icon, it doesn't matter if there's extra text or other elements inside of there. It's more about the structure. So anytime that we're using a frame or a group, that we're using the same sort of layout structure. So you can sort of see that the same layout structure is being used there. And then same thing for this. And as you can sort of see as well, I've added an extra piece of text in there and it hasn't broken everything. It's because we've made sure that the overall structure is the same. So why is that important? Well, let's say that you are trying to create a phone number and you just want to, like, you've made this one into name and then you've typed in Kieran Black. And then you want to duplicate this really quickly and then you want to change this to phone number, but you want to show how it doesn't work, right? So you might do 0412 345 679 or something like that. And then you might add an extra digit because Australia, we only have that many digits. But if we add an extra digit, what we might sort of say is like, oh, we want to show what that looks like when there's an error. So if we go to our state and we change the variant to error, then what we can sort of see is that it actually copied over all the different things that we had for the override from the previous one, right? But it also was able to bring in this new stuff here as well. So if it wasn't laid out appropriately, we would have all kinds of errors where the text overrides didn't like quite take, and you'd have to enter them in manually. So if that's not a big deal to you, then you don't worry about the structure. But I find for speed of use, to make sure that the structure is the same across all of them, just makes it so much easier when you're going to prototype and you're trying to like quickly like bust something out. So yeah, so that's a single dimension. Both of those were single dimension variants, right? So what happens when we get into something a little bit more tricky like this, right? So this is a lot more tricky. It's a lot more tricky in a few different ways. But what the main one is that it's no longer just one single variant, right? Or one single property for the variant, I should say. It's actually multiple properties. And not only that, we have then multiple properties that rely on other multiple properties. So there's a lot at stake here. So what we can do is first look at the assets panel and see how messy it is, because that's often like a great reason as to why to do variants in the first place. But what we can sort of see here is that we have a button component that, as you can sort of see, if I toggle that, it collapses everything. But then we have primary, secondary, and tertiary, just like we have here. And then we have inside of that primary, then we have each of these have then 6 states associated to each one of these variations. So we have icon, icon after, icon before, and no icon. So we have a lot of components. But what we can do now is if we zoom out just a tiny bit, what we can then do is select all of these components. So just to make sure that I mentioned that they are all individual components. They're not like separate, like they're not detached or anything like that. They are all like separated out components. What we can then do is, again, combine as variants. So watch our assets disappear. So what has happened there is it's created one single button. So this made me really, 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 really happy when this came out. So when I did all of that, what that allows us to sort of like see now is we have all of that complexity in one single component, right? So let's see how that actually turned out. So if we drag and drop this button inside of here, what we can sort of see is that, again, like I said, it grabs the top leftmost component and sets that as the default, right? Sets that as the preview and sets it as the default. So when you drag and drop it in, it'll grab the top left primary, right? Which makes sense. I mean, we're going to use the primary one as the default one for most of it anyway. So let me just drag that in because I wasn't supposed to undo that. There we go. All right. So let's say that we have this button. Let's zoom in just a little bit. And what we have here in this button now is we have a few different properties. So we have a property 1, property 2, property 3, and then we can see that it's primary, no icon, and default, which as we can sort of see, that's exactly what it is. Primary, no icon, default, right? So that makes it easy to figure out what part of the matrix it's from. So if we zoom out just a little bit, what we can then do is we can make sure that property 1, 2, and 3 are actually set appropriately. So what we can do here is click onto those. And then if we do that, what actually happens is that we can edit all of these. So the property 1 might be, we might set it to type, for example. So it's type primary, type secondary, type tertiary. For the icon, we can just call this icon. So with icon, icon after, icon before, no icon, right? And then property 3, then we can call this state, right? And that makes it nice and easy for anybody to use there. So again, the order, we may want to change that because again, if we click into this now, you can see that the changes have reflected there. So type, icon, and state, but the changes in like what they're actually set to, like the actual order of those drop downs, you may want to change that, especially for the default active, default hover, focus, right? So what it's defaulted to there is an alpha sort, right? And active is not the greatest because that means you've pressed into it or you selected it, right? You got default and you got disabled. So it's not in a really good usable order. If you go through it in your head, like default, hover, focused, active, loading, disabled, that kind of makes sense in terms of like the points of interaction that you make with it. So let's change that there for it. So again, going back to the variant set, and we can change this to default first, hover second, then focus, then active, then loading, and then disabled. And then we can just leave the icons there. You can change that to whatever, of course. You can say icon, no icon. You might start off with no icon, then icon only, then icon after, icon before. It's up to you. Or you can reflect what you have here. So no icon, icon before, and then icon after, and then icon only. There we go. So that might be something that you're looking for to make sure that you keep it the same as what you have there. So now if we click into this, we can see that it's a primary, it's an icon before, and it's active. But if we click onto this, we can see that we can change it now to default and it's in the correct order that we wanted. All right. So that is, we got component sets done. We've got variants. We've got property and value pairs and how to edit them. So if for whatever reason you forgot to name one of your variants, or if you decide to add a variant later on, so this is another thing that I forgot to mention, is that you can actually, if you haven't pre-made all of your variants like I have, you can actually just create a new variant by clicking on that button there. And what that'll do is that'll create a new variant, and then what it'll ask you for is for you to change it in some sort of way. So this is what this little error is giving us here. The properties and values of this variant are conflicting. Change the applied values on this variant to resolve this. So what it's really saying in that sort of like gobbledygook there is that there is already a definition for primary no icon default, which is exactly this: primary no icon default, which is this one here. So it's saying either change, like create either like another thing here, like a primary, secondary, tertiary, create another like another variation on the icon, or create another state, right? Because it's saying that it already exists. And because we've done all the different variations already, that's the only recourse that we have, is that we have to choose something, that we have to create something brand new. But I'm not going to do that because we don't need to. But if for whatever reason we needed to edit any of the values, the values of one of the properties. So for example, maybe there was a spelling mistake and it should be called, instead of primary, it should be called primary 1 or something like that. Who knows? So all you have to do is you double click into one of these variant values, and then you can then go and change that. Or simply that it was some like default, because as you sort of saw, it said property 1 as the default property name. And it also does, I think it does, depending on if you've changed the property name, if you change it to device, for example, like we did with desktop and mobile, it doesn't automatically, if you create a new variant, it doesn't automatically go, oh, you want a tablet, right? It's not that smart, unfortunately. What it does is it says device 3. So it creates another property that is very, very similar. Another value that is very similar to the other ones based on the property name, if you have named it. Otherwise, it just says variant 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. So that's the cool stuff about that. One other thing is the properties for true and false. So we didn't have anything like this, but let's create one from absolute scratch. So I'm not using something that is already here, right? I'm using something that is based on like what we already have. What I want to do is I want to create something that is absolutely from scratch, which will be like, maybe let's do a switch, for example. So a switch toggle kind of thing. So I'm just going to copy that style there, and then what we will have is we'll have a default, and so we'll have an off and an on, right? So we won't do all the hover states or all that kind of stuff. We'll just have a basic off and then on. Let's do that. So what we can then do is, the first thing that would create would be a container to make sure that it's at least 44 pixels high, and we'll leave it as a like medium gray for now. And let's create a 36 by 20, 36 wide by 20 pixels high. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, 20 pixels high. And we'll just make that a little bit darker just so they can see it. And then we'll create a 16 by 16 inside of here. So 3 rectangles so far. Oh, I always do that. There we go. And we'll round off that corner. We'll change this to a white. And then we'll do the same sort of thing here. We'll round off the corners. And then we'll set this so that it's in the middle of that. So we have 2 pixels away, 2 pixels above, 2 pixels below. And then the 16, the 36 comes from the fact that you're able to then duplicate that over, and then you have that separation in there, right? So what we can then do is then center that inside of that. So what we have is 12 above and 12 below. So maybe we do 12 over from that side as well. And then we'll do 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 there, and do 12. So what we can then do there is we have that all selected. We can create this into a component. So we'll create that into a component and we'll call it switch. So let's go to our layers and we'll call it switch. And we will call it switch/off. Right. So now that we have that, we can actually just delete this rectangle because we have the frame size that we want. And it's a nice sort of size. And then what we can also do is we can also set that it scales and scales, but I'll probably just set it to center and center there so that if we stretch it, it stays centered in there. But what we can also do is just group that so it doesn't move around all that much. And there we go. Oh, something is happening here. I am just going to set this to left and top, and then same here, left and top. And then set the group to be scale and scale if we need to. There you go, center and center. There we are. So now that we have that, we can then create this into a variant. So if we just have the one single component, so we can start off with just one component. So if we do that, and then we can create a variant. So by default, what it thinks it should do is that, again, it'll take that switch slash, it'll take that, name the component as that, and then it'll create the slash whatever it was. It'll treat that as a value of a new property. And in this case, it thinks it's property 1, which is equal to off, which isn't correct. We'll call it I don't know, switch or something like that, right? So what we can then do is we can then say on or whatever. And then we can then say for this one, instead of saying off on, what we can actually do is we can say that, or we can change it to active. Maybe active is a better word for that. Okay. So let's say that we have this one here. We can see that it says off, and then we can change this one to on, right? But of course, we want to change the actual values of that and change the color there to be something completely different. So maybe this is part of our design, colors and all that kind of stuff. Let's use some purple there. And there we go. All right, so we have an off state and an on state. So what happens there is if we go to our assets, again, we have a switch that we can drag in. And then because we've set it to off and on as the default values, because there's only 2 of them, and because we've used a keyword, which is off and on, we can actually switch that on and on, off and on, like we actually are doing the actual switch, which is kind of cool. All right. So it doesn't have to be a switch. It just happens to be a switch component. It doesn't have to be a switch to do this. The thing is that it's 2 values for one single property, and that those 2 values are set to, as I wrote down here, if I zoom out a little bit more, either true, false, yes, no, or on and off, right? And I chose on and off because that's what a switch is better known for. But yeah, so that's it from me. I know that was a little bit longer than what I sort of said, but I want to open it up to questions. If you are having trouble with any kind of Figma things, there are some links that I put in the chat. If you're watching this later on, I'll just zoom in on this so you can take a screenshot and then do this take those links and do what you want. But the Figma community page has a whole bunch of variant playground documents that you can play around with. And it really sort of goes through each and everything that I just sort of showed you there. And it makes it so much easier to understand what to do with real world examples. So go in there, and I recommend any thing that they have playground in the name. Download it, play around with it, because they do a really good job in teaching what you can and can't do with variants, and as well as any of the other features. There are 2 videos that both Figma have released. So Figma Variants, that one there, again, the link's there if you need it. that one there is just like an overview of like what it can and can't do. And then the Figma office hours, this actually goes into depth with some of the creators of the feature, as well as some of the people who like are often on the Figma streaming videos. They go through like what they use it for, what they would love to use it for, like again, limitations and so on and so forth. So yeah, dive into that. The first one there is 15 minutes. That one there is about an hour and 20 minutes. So yeah, buckle in for that because that's a long one. But yeah, all right, let's dive into some questions.
Sweet. Hello, everyone, again. So we'll start with Kevin's question. Kevin is asking, do you have a template saved for these variants?
Not specifically, but like if I was to create a like UI kit, for example, I would just grab from this. So there isn't anything that like I go to specifically because I can create them in not that much of a time. But yeah, I know a lot of people do have like UI kits or like a save template file themselves that they just drag and drop into any new document or project that they may be doing.
Eric is asking, and I'm assuming it is a continuation to Kevin's question. Does that mean these button variants automatically become working animations when you go in prototype mode?
Not yet. And I say yet with a big emphasis around that, because what they did actually talk about them in September. It's interaction states, right? So what that will actually happen is I think they like, and don't quote me on this because you'll find it in their documentation somewhere, but I think it was like January, February, somewhere around there, somewhere early in the new year, 2021. That they are going to be doing that. So having the same structure, like I was harping on before, having the same structure will be really important because if you've used any sort of like animation tool where you're animating between one artboard and another artboard and you need them to animate between each other, the naming and the structure is really crucial in that kind of stuff. So yeah, it makes sense that they would use that same kind of thing. But yeah, not just yet, but it is on the roadmap and yeah, coming.
Great. And I apologize to mispronounce your name, Zehra. Does copy and pasting a variant from one file to another automatically assign that variant into a master for that file?
Well, let's try it out. Let's see if let's make sure that I'm sharing my screen before I do something. Let's go share screen. Cool. And switch back. So what I'm assuming that they're talking about is, can I grab something as complicated as this, like this button that we just spent all that time creating? Can I copy this and then literally create a new file and then just simply paste it in? Yes, you can. And it'll bring over all the stuff that we just created. We can drag and drop. We can see that all the properties are named appropriately and so on and so forth. So this is really good if you have like a project that you need, that you know that you're going to pretty much make the same, like especially for something like buttons. There's not really much that you're going to change all that much between projects. Maybe you change the typography. Maybe you change the icons that you use. Maybe you change like the height or the roundness of the buttons. But all in all, like very, very small design decisions, right? If you do that, like at least all the states, all the primary, secondary, and tertiary buttons are there. So you don't have to sit there like trying to figure out what to do every single time. So maybe creating something like this for yourself and like using it so that you can change it to like, hello, this is a button, and having that set up so that you can also do it like that, and then set it up so that it can be an inline button or a block button. You can do that. So that's why I personally have created this. So I don't have to sit there going, oh, how did I create an inline button again? And how do I create a block button. It's all the same component. And because of that, I can change it to like my secondary button like really easily and do all of that. So looks like I need to update that one there, but yeah, such is life. So it is possible to bring in some of those components over to a new file. You're on mute, Diego.
Sorry. Kaylee's asking, when I create a variant, the master and variant end up in a purple dashed rectangle. I can move the variant out, but the square remains. What is that for? How do I utilize it / eliminate it?
Yeah, so you can actually stylize it. You can change the dash to something else. It's there, like you can stylize it to something that is like a color that you're like more familiar with, but it is kind of supposed to look like it's different from everything else that you've done, right? So you may not use, you may actually have purple as your brand color, right? In which case you may want to change it to green or something like that. So that's different from the rest of your design. But the dashes, like we hardly use that in UI design, maybe for a drag and drop point, but that's about it. So what they're trying to do there is create something still somewhat visually nice, but also different enough that it doesn't look like it's part of everything else there. So yeah, if you want to change that, go for it. But like personally, I would just leave it as the default so that if you're working on a bigger team, nobody's going, where did you put all your components or where did you put all your variant sets, right? You've got them all there and they just know where they are.
Cecily actually had a question regarding the copy and pasting that you answered previously. So she was asking, would you need to hook up the correct library to the new file before copy / pasting that button into the new file to keep the styles in sync?
Yeah, so if the ones that I created, they won't actually link to any sort of style because it was just a demo file. But yes, if you had color styles, text styles, effect styles, any of that kind of stuff that was linked to that in the original file, it tries its best to do it, but it actually fails horribly, which is a bit of a shame. But I think what they're doing there is they're trying to make you think about, like, rather than rewriting like an existing style, what would have to happen is you'd have to like have like a matching sort of system each time you copied and pasted every time from another Figma file, and maybe they didn't want to do that, or it's like in the backlog somewhere of their features that they want to do. Who knows? But what I can sort of say there is that no, it doesn't bring over the styles. And if you are wanting to go from one library to another library, yes, you would have to hook that up and make sure that everything is synced up in that way.
Great. Our next question. One second. Here we go. Elliot's question. We really never covered libraries in Foundations. He's talking about UX Academy Foundations, for those of you that don't know. So the components we created over the course are still living in each individual file. Is this what libraries would accomplish? Is there a good intro to libraries in Figma, if so? Yeah,
so again, I would point you to Figma's YouTube page, as well as Figma's documentation. It seems like, documentation page, gross. But they actually do have a lot of videos. They have a lot of examples, like heaps and heaps of stuff in there. But libraries, what they do is it's actually an external, it's just another Figma file, but it is given like heavenly presence, right? It's sort of like, this is like the thing that we base off all of our designs. So inside of that, what we can do is we can put components, we can put styles like text styles, effect styles, color styles inside of that library. And what that allows us to do is use just those components in any other file that we ever want to do, right? So this is a really great way to have like a single source of truth, which is often something that you'll hear in the real world of like, like how do we make sure that designers and developers are on the same page, blah, 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 blah. And yeah, having a library like that makes it so that designers on your team aren't creating their own components and doing whatever the hell they want. What they're actually doing is they all grabbing from one single place and then inserting it into there. So you can then set permissions on that library that maybe, so maybe like, let's say that you have like 20 or so designers on a team, and maybe there's like one designer or two designers that are sort of like senior designers and the rest are sort of like mid and junior. Right. So maybe you don't want the junior designer that's just started like last week editing like the main library. Right. So you can say that, hey, don't touch that. You can say that all you want, but you can actually lock that down with Figma's editing features and all that kind of stuff. Just like you would when you may have like shared this with your mentor, that you can share versus view. And all that kind of stuff. So you can do the same sort of thing with a library. So in that way, people can still use the library, but they may not have direct access to edit the library. And yeah, that's what libraries are all there for. Yeah, and Elliot Boswell just chucked in the chat a link to team libraries in there. And yeah, that's a really good, basic intro into it. So yeah, if you want to look into that, yeah, I'd definitely say that. But again, it's only really meant for really large projects or if you're working in a really large team. So I wouldn't say for an individual, it's probably not worth it. And that's why they monetize it. That's why you sort of like have to go into that. So yeah, personally, I do a lot of freelance projects and I never really have to use them. So yeah, it's not a big deal if you're a freelancer or a designer working on your own. But as soon as you get into the real life jobs out there, then yeah, team libraries might be a thing for you.
Here we go. Jeremy is asking, how would you make global changes to all the component elements for all variants? I can only globally update if I make them ahead of time with nested elements. If I use the plus button to add a new one later, it isn't linked to anything and can't be adjusted in one place.
Yeah, so this is where it gets tricky. And it depends on the component, of course, and depends how much like order layout you're using and so on and so forth. But there are ways of doing things where you can use what's called a base or a structured component, then do an instance of that. So instead of me doing all of that, let me sort of hand wavy away. Let's actually show you how I would do something like that, right? So let's go over to Figma. So what was the asker's name? Sorry. I think you're on mute, Diego.
Jeremy.
Jeremy.
Sorry, I do it so I don't interrupt.
Yeah, no, it's all good. What Jeremy is asking is like, if I wanted to change, for example, these four component variants all have the same purple being used. So one way I can link them all together is using color styles, right? So I can select that, and that. As you can sort of see, the fill style is set to 6200EE. If I was to do this, if I was a smarter man, I'd probably set this to a color style and set this to like purple/6 and create that as a style. Right. So I usually do for my spectrum colors, I usually do a 1 to 9 thing. And this would be just slightly above the middle range there. So that's why the 6. What I would then do is like, that is all good if I am able to change like that color all at the same time. So I can then change this purple, edit that settings to whatever color that I can do, to whatever there, and it changes all of those. And of course, if the pieces of text were also set to the same thing, I could change that as well, all to that same thing there. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is the structure of it. right? So stylistically, I can do that. But for other things like the structure of it, so maybe like the padding of it, so using auto layout and so on and so forth, we could do that. So for example, what you could do technically is if I detach this instance and if I duplicate this icon and I move this over, technically I could make this into a reusable component that would do all of these. So what I'll call this is like button base or something like that. So let's call this button base, right? Or some other people do like a dot button, right? So like say that it's not really a component, it's like a primitive of a component. It just depends on what you're trying to do. But this is getting into the intermediate to advanced sort of like stuff. So let's say that we create this as a component. What I would then do is then duplicate this, have an instance of it, and then create a variant of that. So if we add a variant around that, so we would have to create a component around that. So it actually creates another component around the instance of the component, which kind of seems a bit messy, but that's how you would do it. And we would call this button test, just so that I don't break the other one below. And what we can then do is we can add a variant onto that, right? So why is that like necessary? Well, what you can do is you can actually delete that and delete that. And then we have our primary button. If we then move this over, we can then do that and then do that. And then we can have our icon before and we can have our icon after. And then we can also have our icon only, right? If I just double click into it enough to delete that. There you go. So now we have all of those, and then we can just fully round that off. Oh, not on that one, on this one, sorry. Fully round that off. And then those are our buttons. So what we can then do is in this button test, we have default variant 1, variant 2, variant 3, and 4. So we can change this to, what do we say? I think it was just icon before. So we can say no icon. We can say icon before, and then icon after, and then icon only. So yes. So why would you do this? Well, the reason is because you could change all of these all at the one time, right? So you could change. Obviously, you can change the color to whatever, and do whatever you want there, right? But the other thing is that you can also change like how round it is, for example. So you may want to change like the roundness of those there. You may want to add some extra padding. So you might want to do 20 on there and then 16 top and bottom. And then maybe you want to change this text to, I don't know, Comic Sans or something like that. And use that, right? So whatever you want to do there, you can do it. The problem with this, and this is more of an auto layout issue than it is anything else. And so maybe it'll be fixed next week when I think they're going to launch it because they seem to launch new features when they announce new features as part of like their YouTube series. So that's what they did with Variants. So that's what I'm predicting now. So that'll be the 20th. So we'll have another video on that later on. So what I'm sort of thinking there is that when I go to bring in my assets of this newly found button test, yes, it will do all of the different things. So no icon, icon before, icon after, all that kind of stuff. But the problem is that because auto layout has its quirks, is that if I start to try and do any of this kind of stuff, it may or may not like work the way that I want it to for all of these. So you got to make sure that it works to the way that you want it. So in this case, like I actually want it to stretch based off of this. So what I would have to do is I would have to make an inline version and then a block version. So in this case, this is the inline version, and then I'd have to make a different one that is a block version. So it really depends on what your purpose is for your design. and like how far you want to go with making it fully customizable. For me, like I keep it like this, like without the base, because for me it's not that big of a deal to change these like without like messing all of it up. So you can come in here and then deselect these, and then deselect these, and then change it all to 8 pixels, for example, right? It's not like breaking my back to do that. It's not that big of a deal. But yeah, of course, like I would love it for it to work like this, but it doesn't work exactly the way that I want it. So in this case, the reason why this is bad is because if I then say, oh, I do want it to stretch to this, right? If I then reset this back to the original size, which is there, right? What actually happens is that if I keep going with this text, it actually breaks outside of it, right? So you've got to like play around with like what matters to you. Does making the inline and block versions of them in the one single component matter to you? So, or does having it as like, let's say that we create an inline and then we make a block version. So we'd have to like create one that works for block as well as a separate variant. So that then would be a different base again, right? So we'd have to create a button inline and a button block as 2 separate bases, which would then defeat the purpose of doing this whole thing. So yes, it's possible, but if you're using any kind of auto layout and nested auto layout like I am for these buttons, like, and you're most likely going to be doing that inside of your designs, yeah, it becomes like too much trouble, like for what it's worth. Like you just simply select something and then you change it, like, and it's done, right? I would just stick to doing that. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question. And on both levels of the like the styling versus like structure. Are you muted again, Diego?
Yep. He's also asking, sorry, can you elaborate on what needs to be part of the initial structure?
So there's nothing that quote unquote needs to be part of the initial structure. So the reason why I've got this here is because I know that there's going to be a no icon, with icon before, icon after, right? So what I have here is I have an icon before, an icon after, and then I also have these spaces in between here that will allow it to have the different variations. Again, this is a shortcoming of auto layout because it doesn't allow you to have separate values for left versus right, which is what I have over here. So I have a 12 pixel gap here versus a 16 pixel gap here, because visually they look identical, but because of like how icons work, it actually isn't actually like that. So you can sort of see that it's 12 pixels around if we put that little border there, but I've got a 4 pixel gap in between there. So yeah, like what happens here is that if I put all that together, it actually makes it really easy for me to then duplicate that and create instances of it. So there's nothing that quote unquote has to be in this base. It's just the structure that would allow for all the different instances of it, right? Which is exactly this, right? So that's, yeah, I don't know how to explain that any further. I think the best way to do it is just try it out and see what works for you. And yeah, like I mentioned, the base is just all versions all at the same time, right? It's like Schrodinger's button, right? Until you look at it and it becomes whatever you want it to be.
Sweet. Our next question from Kwani. When you mentioned the component size, meaning for the switch, the container sizes, etc., were you following a specific design system?
No, just that the touch point for accessibility is 44 by 44 pixels or points. like that's it. Nothing too crazy there. That's just, yeah, basic accessibility. So yeah, just like for all of my buttons, as you can sort of see, or these ones I adjusted, but these ones here are 44 pixels high. So just to make sure that everything is clickable with your fingers, is 44 pixels high. If you were doing a desktop only, you wouldn't really have to worry about that because you have a lot more pinpoint accuracy with a mouse. But because you are using this for both desktop, tablet, and mobile, and you're going from cursor input to finger input, you'll want to make sure that, yeah, you're using nice and big chunky buttons as much as possible.
Elina's question, you mentioned the 4 pixel gap. It visually looks okay, but it's not exact numerically. Is that okay?
Yeah, so what it would be is 12 on the left-hand side and 16 on the right-hand side. So your developer isn't going to care about that. It's more about like you and what you want to do there. So yeah, that's perfectly fine. If you did like 3 pixels and 17 pixels and you're let's say that you are doing a design system that is reliant on variables, for example, so spacing variables specifically, and 3 and 17 weren't part of your spacing variables, then your developer would care about that, right? So I found that most developers don't care as long as you're using their system, using the system that you both created together, and you don't go like, oh, just because I just want it that way, right? It's more of a, it's like, oh no, it's actually based on something, right? So yeah, no, it's perfectly fine.
Sweet. And our last question, can you show how you add those spacers in auto layout?
Yeah, sure. So I can deconstruct one of those buttons. So let's duplicate this out here. Let's do all of that because that's just okay. So what I can do is if I detach this instance. So what I would do, let's like start from absolute scratch. So let's say that I created a button. So I got the container there, and then I'll drag and drop this icon over. So we can see that it's a 20 by 20 icon, and then this here is if I just type in some text here. So I'll type in primary. This is 16 by 20. And so it's a good line height for Inter, but it also happens to be the same like height as this icon. So when you go to match them up, it's nice and easy like that. So if I was to just do like a really basic auto layout, so if I made that white there, and then made this the purple color there, what we can sort of do is we want to have the spacing between here and here be of like some sort of number. So if I do Shift A to do auto layout, we can set it to like, let's say 8 pixels between them. You can set it to whatever. It obviously depends on the icon size and the font size and blah, blah, blah. But 8 pixels is a good sort of size if you're doing 16 and 16 pixels for the font and then 20 pixels for the icon sort of size. So that's how I'd do that. So if we were to grab this one and then grab the outside layer here and then do another Shift A to then get us to that auto layout, what we can then do is set it to, let's say, I don't know, 16 left and right and then 12 top and bottom, right? And then we have our roundness there and 4 pixels there. So what we can sort of see here, and this is why I was doing, so let's duplicate, actually, let's use the assets that we have here using our newly found thing, and we'll say an icon before. So what we can sort of see here is visually that the one that I created before with the extra 4 pixels on this side actually looks a little bit more centered than this one does, even though mathematically it's correct, right? So it's 16 to 16, whereas this one is 12 on this side, 12 on that side, but there is a 4 pixel spacer there, right? So this is why I'm doing this. And again, this spacer is only there because auto layout doesn't allow you to do that. And again, I hope that the new version of auto layout allows you to do different spacing between the two. So what this allows us to do is if we then look at this, we can say, okay, well, actually, I want 12 to be on this side and then 16 to be on this side. So what we have to do is we actually have to make it down to 12 there. So if we set that to 12, what we can then sort of see is that it looks a little bit too close on this side. So that's where we add the spacer back in. So if we create a spacer that is 4 pixels wide and 20 pixels high, so 20 pixels high to be the same height as the text and as the icon, what we can then do is we can drag and drop that in to here, right? And what we'll notice if we go over to our layers panel is that it's adding it inside of this frame, but because this frame has the auto layout associated to it, it's now 8 pixels away. So what we need to do is we actually need to create another auto layout. So this is 3 layers deep auto layout. So if we go into this and create this here, we can then do another Shift A, which is a shortcut for auto layout. If you don't remember that, you can always right click and say add auto layout, or you can select it from the right hand side if it's available. Sometimes it hides it if you're already inside of another auto layout, which I currently am. So you can see that it doesn't actually show here, which is a little bit frustrating. But yeah, if you do Shift A, that will show up as well. So what we want to do there is set that to 0. And that's how we get that to be there, to the same sort of size there. And then we can set that fill to null there, right? So as you type something in, it will always be 16 pixels away. And then this will always be 12 pixels away for that, right? So if I do the same sort of thing for what's it called? For the icon after, I just simply switch this around. So that's after that one, but I put the spacer beforehand, so I can do that over here. It's a little bit easier. I can just flip that around so the spacer is on the left-hand side rather than the right-hand side. So then we have 16 on this side. Then we have an 8 pixel spacer through auto layout. Then we have 12 pixels from the right-hand side. And you can still sort of see that that is more visually balanced than if I didn't have it. So yeah.
Sweet. That was actually our last question.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think this has been like one of our shorter, design skills workshops that we've had. So just we want to thank everyone, obviously. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for all of your questions. As I said before, and those of you who have joined us before, there will be a recording of this on our YouTube page, and I've added it in the initial message. Oh no, I did not. Maybe I did. Maybe I did later. Anyways, I will add it again. I thought I added it to the beginning. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second, everyone, and I will add it again where you will find the recording. Anyways, thank you again. Thank you, Kieran. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their week, of their evening or morning, depending on where you are. I hope everyone takes care and stay safe.
See you, everybody.